Today, we're really excited to chat with our experts about how to build a newsletter for your target audience that they absolutely love. First off, Nathan is a co-founder of Every, a writer collective studying business and humans. There he writes a newsletter called Divinations. Did I say that right, Nathan?
You did.
About business strategy. And before this, Nathan was the first employee at Substack, as well as the head of product at Gimlet Media. Louis is a co-founder of SparkLoop, where he helps thousands of newsletters and media brands grow their audience faster. He was previously founded and exited several SaaS businesses and is spending 2022 in Lisbon, Portugal. I wish I was there with you too, Louis. Awesome. Before we, maybe to start the session, I'll ask a pretty high level question and love your perspective on this, but what is the value of an email subscriber?
Great question. I'll jump in with that one then, if that's okay. I think it's such an interesting question. I think the interesting question about like the value of a newsletter is that it's something that nearly everybody gets wrong. So even people who have everyone has like a vague idea of what a subscriber is worth. And unless you have literally just like a paid newsletter that is only paid, where it's really easy to work out the value of a subscriber because it's just how long do they stick around and how much do they pay. I think everyone is just wildly off on how much a subscriber is actually worth. And we've put together a calculator. We've done some of these calculations for newsletter operators, small ones, big ones, people who are just starting out, brands who have a newsletter where the newsletter isn't even like the main business. And it's amazing to see them go through these calculations and be like, yeah, I think probably a newsletter subscriber, maybe $2, maybe $2.50, something like that's probably what it's worth to us. And then you go away and you do the math and they're like, $25, that could be right. Like that's too much. And we see that consistently, that everybody just really dramatically underestimates the actual value of their newsletter audience. And that has like, if we're talking about growth today or engagement or whatever, it has just huge ramifications for like the entire conversation. Because if you're undervaluing your audience by like 10x, then everything you do around growth, around engagement, around the time you invest into content, the amount you invest into like, making the newsletter great, going to be wildly underspending and wildly off in the amount of investment you should be putting in there. So I don't know what Nathan thinks. I'm sure they have a much better idea of it at Every.
Yeah, no, it's $15. That's it. No. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because I feel like I've seen time and time again, like two companies, one, they're all in on product and that's all they focus on. And they don't create any content. They don't focus on marketing. And, their growth is like, okay, people seem to like it once they find out about it. But then some competitor comes on and it's like, wow, how much money and energy are they putting into like content and marketing and all this stuff? And then it feels like they kind of start to take off and they're like discounted at first. It's like, it's just all marketing or whatever, but then it just keeps going and it's like, okay, like these things make a huge difference and really, really compound over the long run because, an email subscriber that you acquire is not just a potential customer in the short run of whatever product you're already building. It's someone who knows who you are and to some extent trust you enough to want to receive messages in their inbox from you. And so the option value of that, well, that's just what you can do with it, right? So like Every, we started out with a certain thing and then we've parlayed that into a lot of other things, we started with just like really simple newsletters that weren't monetized. And then we launched a subscription newsletter business. And then we launched, we started putting ads in the newsletters for the free edition. And then now we started doing courses and like, it's great because it's all based on, there's some people who trust us about a certain topic area. And, whatever you can do with that relationship is kind of like the sky's the limit,
Yeah, I love that, guys. The idea that email subscribe isn't just an email, but a relationship that you can grow and extend. That's super, super valuable. I'm sure you have a lot of conversations with people around this subject matter. What are some of the misnomers that you stumble upon often that you want to debunk,
I mean, one misnomer I think is basically I think a lot of times when people are just getting started, they kind of have a conflicting they have conflicting thoughts about how they could grow faster. One is, should I change the way what my content is? Like if I somehow improve the content itself, would that help? And the other is, maybe I just need better distribution and I shouldn't fiddle so much with my content. And the answer is, of course, both. But I think in the early days, more often than not, people are tempted to not blame the content because it's sort of a painful and scary thought to be like, my content's just not that great. But if you just approach the mindset of your content's never that great and it can always be better, and you'll see a lot of gain from improving the content, then typically you do much better over the long run. And then you can layer in a whole bunch of the other stuff. And you can even do that in the early days too. I think there's a misnomer about like, well, you shouldn't spend any time optimizing growth in the early days. You just only should focus on content. Like, no, you can do both. Like there's enough time, I think, to go around for both. But I think it's extremely painful to entertain the thought that maybe my content's just not that great yet. But that's the default. That everyone starts out with not great content. I have content now that is still not great. I think every day we have a team meeting and it's like, how did our piece go? And I talk about all the ways that I think it could go better for me, for my piece. And so I just think it's a better mindset to have, is like your content can always be way better, but for some reason, a lot of people just don't. It's hard to wrap their head around that, I think, because it's painful.
Yeah, that's definitely humbling to hear. Obviously, creating content is a creative process, right? So you're putting a little piece of yourself out there all the time. Yeah. So that's great. Louis, any thoughts on your end?
I think maybe just to build on that, I think, the quality of content, it's especially in a newsletter, it's not objective quality. It's subjective in the eyes of your readership and of your audience. And I think as you begin, maybe you aren't quite sure who those people are yet. Maybe you aren't quite sure what they're hoping for from. Maybe that changes over time. Maybe it's, the content is great, just the way you're presenting it, the way you're, creating it is maybe not quite right, the right format, maybe, right? So I think there's a whole load of things that do improve. And that's one of the reasons that I think, especially if we're talking about people or businesses that are starting out with their newsletter, one of the issues I see people making very often is they want to keep the stuff that's in the newsletter itself. And they're like, I can't publish this anywhere else. I can't turn this into a thread, or I can't publish this to Medium or to LinkedIn as a blog article or on my blog or anything like that, because if it's there for free, people won't sign up for the newsletter, right? So I'd say in the beginning, it's almost more worthwhile to just take that conversation, take the content that you want to put into the newsletter, make it public, take it to where your audience already is, have conversations with them there, become more well-known there, interact with them and learn from them, where they can comment, and it's really easy to get feedback and to see what they didn't understand or what they disagreed with, and to get content ideas. And then the reason they're going to sign up for the newsletter is not because they wanted to read that piece again. It's because they want to get the next piece from you. They want to hear the next thing you're going to say, right? So I would say that's a big issue that I see, especially in the early days, is trying to keep everything gated inside of the newsletter and not going out to where your audience is and really interacting with them.
That's a really good tip to kind of get over that empty page syndrome, and get started. I think that's what I'm hearing. Nathan, do you have any other pointers from your perspective on how to get over that empty page syndrome and start engaging with your audience?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the key thing is just to commit to a schedule, because if you're like, okay, Wednesday is my day, I have to publish on Wednesdays, and everybody knows it, then you'll come up with ideas, like maybe out of fear at first, right? And you might hit publish and be like, oh, that wasn't very good, but I can guarantee it's so much better than not publishing. And I think that as soon as you get in the rhythm where you're like, okay, I've got my schedule, then your brain is on the lookout, right? So when you're on Twitter, you're like, oh, this could be interesting. And not only is my brain on the lookout, like my wife's brain is on the lookout. She DMs me like, you should write Divinations post about this. And like, everybody around you can start to kind of like, they start to think like, okay, cool. Like, what are you going to write about? Once you get into a good rhythm. I think that's sort of like the most important thing. And then besides that, there's all sorts of stuff you can do. Like just read a lot, like the higher quality input, the higher quality output. Read stuff that other people might not be reading right now, but apply it to stuff that people are currently thinking about. So people are currently thinking about AI a lot right now. If you've read something that seems like it's totally unrelated, but actually could explain a lot about that, like that's a great formula, So there's a whole bunch of different tips within that, but the most important one is just schedule, I think is my suggestion.
That's a really good call out. I think just going back to one of the comments you made earlier around the importance of building a relationship, how do you nail down that audience that you want to invest in and build that relationship with and get that feedback from? What's your process around that?
You mean kind of like defining who
Yeah.
what kind of audience you want?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Because I'm guessing that's probably a big pillar on how to kind of narrow your focus a little bit and get started. Right.
Yeah.
Because you also
Totally.
want the right feedback from the right people as well.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's hard. Because I feel like it depends on the type of newsletter, right? So if you're writing a newsletter that's like going to be a marketing channel for some piece of software you're building or some other type of business you're building, then the people who might use your product are kind of like the natural people who you might want to write for. But in the case of like, if you are a person with ideas and you just want to express your ideas and you don't know exactly where it could lead, there's this trade-off where the more kind of legible and narrow you make what you're all about, the faster you grow, but it can feel uncomfortable to do so because you might have a bunch of different ideas. And I'm like wildly under optimized on that. Like I think Divinations would grow a lot faster if I was a little bit more clear. Like I basically said, it's about strategy, like principles of business strategy that they teach you, like, in business school and stuff like that. Yeah. But I also write about tech and a whole bunch of other stuff, and it doesn't really. Honestly, growth has suffered a little bit because of it. I think one of the reasons why some of the people who started out as my peers and now have exceeded me, like Lenny Rachitsky, who writes Lenny's newsletter, like that's a much bigger newsletter. And the reason why is because I think one of the reasons why is because he's incredibly focused, right? On just like, this is for product leaders, product managers, product directors, VP of product, whatever. If that's you, this is for you. And he just nails it. And it's so funny because I talked to him recently. I'm like, are you like tempted all the time to write about other stuff? And he's like, not really. So some of it is kind of like, there's got to be like a personality market fit kind of thing to it. And you can't really like, you can't too much arbitrarily like morph yourself into something that you're not, because there's all sorts of ways to succeed. There's other writers like Slate Star Codex. It's not like that has a really legible focus, and his audience is also extremely large. So there's examples of succeeding in a lot of different types of ways, but I think it's tough. I think it's something you discover over time. I think it's something that evolves over time. I think it's the most sustainable way to do it is just whatever you're really excited about. Because if you're ultimately not excited about a thing, then you won't keep going, and it's better to keep going than not. You know, but if you, to the extent you can, kind of like define a legible circle of people, then that does help.
So it sounds like that focus is it's not a prerequisite for success, but it does help accelerate growth if you're able to get that. Awesome. Louis, any thoughts? I see you nodding along over there.
No, I agree with everything Nathan said. I think the only thing I'd add in there, was just the it's a difficult question to answer because you have so many different types of newsletter that are being created for so many different reasons. So in some of them, your hand is forced with what your audience is because there's a strategic purpose behind it or a marketing purpose. And then with others, it's just, I want to write a cool newsletter and I really like UFOs. So I'm going to write about UFOs and I don't care if anyone else wants to hear about it. And probably there'll be some weirdos out there who do, probably like 100,000 of them if you can ever find. So what I would say is, like, if you're in the second camp, then you have a whole different set of challenges, which is like you need to discover these people and sort of figure out a way to find these people and what they're searching for and how they're talking about this space. But if you're in the first group, that's where you sometimes you don't have that inherent passion necessarily, right? It's not as obvious that you really want to write about just this one thing that your audience really cares about that you need to do strategically. And in that case, what I've found really helpful for myself and also for newsletter operators that I speak to is to invest a lot more time in talking to your audience and to having sort of direct relationships with them rather than just pushing content out. Because if you can see the effect it's having on your audience, if you can understand how it's helping them, the questions they have, the more invested you become that way, then the more you'll enjoy the process of creating and the more excited you'll be to do what's right for them. Yeah. So
I guess it gives a sense of community and connectedness that way, right? Yeah.
Huge plus one to that for any type of writer, I think is really good. Like we launched a course, and so I got to spend a lot more time with readers lately than I had before that in a very different kind of setting. And it's like, even if we didn't make any money off of it, it would be such a great idea to do, because it's like live performance of a blog post, basically, with like lots of participation and exercises and stuff like that everyone does together. And I mean, kind of going back to the thing about like, what's the supply chain of writing? Like, what are your inputs? It's your experiences you have in life, which is a combo of like media or information or reading that you do, like information you consume, and like stuff you do or people you talk to. You gotta invest in that if you want to have a different kind of output. You know, and so just talking to people is so important.
Yeah, I love that, the supply chain of writing. I want to dig into that a little bit more, because I think it plays off your comment, Louis, around building direct relationships. So both of you have mentioned that building a relationship with readers is super important. What are some of the methods, tactics, frameworks that both of you use to kind of create a rich supply chain of inputs? If I'm borrowing from you, Nathan.
Yeah. Well, I'll jump in just really quickly on that point about the supply chain of the content. I think something, Nathan, you mentioned Lenny's newsletter, and something he does incredibly well that I think is really underutilized is a lot of the content that's sort of created and some of the most popular stuff. He hasn't actually been the one to necessarily write that or to create all of it himself. He's co-creating with other prolific creators and other newsletter operators and just industry professionals. And it's all high quality, obviously, you know, in the same sort of consistent voice so that his audience appreciates it. But that really makes it a lot easier to scale, it makes it a lot easier to function, and it gets him that sort of extra perspective and insight that he maybe would struggle to deliver, you know, week in, week out by himself. So I think that is something that I would heavily recommend, especially if you run more of like a B2B newsletter. Like if you're doing this for a marketing purpose, like bring in the top 20 people in your space and give them the audience. You know, obviously help them to create something that's great for your audience. I think that is something that's vastly underutilized, including we don't do a good enough job of that ourselves. So that's something I'm going to go and think about. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to add to that really quickly. It also helps with growth too, because every new person who writes for your newsletter is probably going to tell people about it. You know, so
definitely.
That's
I think sorry.
Oh no, go for it. Yeah.
I was going to go back to the original question, which was more around the how do you create that engagement. And I think there's a lot of stuff that happens not so tactically, that it's more sort of on the strategic level, but on the tactical level, something I've noticed that's been really impactful is to remind your audience who you are and to put a photo of yourself or some sort of avatar of yourself into the newsletter each time, because that's something that one of the differences for me between a newsletter and a blog or a newsletter and an article is that it's written directly to someone and it's from someone. And I bet if you think about the best newsletters that you want to read every week, for most of them, you can almost imagine what that person sounds like, they look like. You'll know the name of the person who's writing it in almost all cases. And it's something, I don't think it's a coincidence that if you look at some of the most popular newsletters out there, they will have a little photo of the person who's writing it. They will have the name. It'll be very obvious, even if it's coming from a brand, who is the person who's actually writing it, whose thoughts are they? And it will be written to a specific person. So it's a small thing, it's a tactical thing, but I do think it makes a big difference.
Yeah, it's a good idea. We should do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually going to be one of my questions, Louis, further down in our chat. But one of the trends, and again, correct me, feel free to check me if I'm incorrect, but one of the trends I've been seeing is newsletters almost becoming the new dailies, right? So newspapers used to be something you woke up to and read, and people followed writers, etc. In a corporate setting, because a lot of people in our audience are startups and scale-ups. In a corporate setting, how important is it to have the content coming from the brand or the individual contributors or writer? How do you balance kind of that core movement?
That's a tricky question. I mean, off the top of my head, and I'm sure Nathan's got he's probably something he thinks about a lot more than I do. I think it was Adam Ryan in his Perpetual newsletter who had a really good take on this about like I'm going to mess this up now. It's the House of Brands versus, I forgot the branded house. What the other one was? Yeah, the branded house. Yes. So it's do you have the creators who are sort of, you're very much to a creator's newsletter and you're reading them and then they're being supported behind the scenes by a brand? Or is it the branded content first and then you're bringing in creators who are sort of being into that mold? And I think you can see different brands and different newsletters trying to do that at the moment. And I mean, it's a thing from newsletters, right? That you would, in some cases, buy a newspaper just because they have one columnist whose column that you wanted to read each week. So I think there's no clear sort of like one is better than the other. But I don't know, Nathan, maybe you've got some thoughts.
Athletic has built up the business on the back of that, right? Yeah, they picked up all the laid off writers, sports writers. So, but anyways, yeah, Nathan.
Yeah, I think it depends on the type of business. So there are some newsletters I get like from like there's this one brand, Tecovas. It's like they make boots, right? And like other Western wear. And like I'm my family's all from Texas and stuff like that. I live in California now. And I just open that. I'm like not going to buy anything from them on that regular of a basis, but sometimes I do. And they have, you know, whatever. And I like, you know, whoever wrote that, it doesn't matter. It's just like cool photos basically. Right. And so if you're like a D2C company with like a aspirational type product that just gives people warm vibes, they honestly might want that in their inbox every day or a couple times a week or whatever. And it just doesn't matter. Just have really cool photos and like maybe some interesting stuff that they might want to buy. It's like the email equivalent of like going to the mall, you know, you're window shopping kind of. And then, you know, there's other things where you're more like consuming opinions and paradigms and worldviews and tactics and stories. And usually that's better when you know whose it's from, right? Because there's a degree of dependence on the person's prior experiences that you want to understand. Like when you read Divinations, it's interesting to know simultaneously, okay, here's the ideas that this guy is saying, but also like he was the first employee at Substack, you know, like that's where it's coming from. And so, you know, I think that kind of thing matters a lot more when it comes to like opinions or frameworks or analysis. And then there's some middle ground stuff where it's like, maybe it's a little bit more utilitarian, like tips and tricks type of a thing. Like if you have a tool, like, I don't know, I'll just make something up. So we're talking about writing. If you have a tool for writers, you know, maybe you've got kind of like a grammar related newsletter or something like that. Like it's a little bit less dependent upon who the person is and like what their background is. So I think it's just, there should probably be a fit between the job the content does in someone's life and how important it is to understand where that person was coming from and how much it's like opinion or like speculative versus like, this is very concretely helpful how-to type stuff, or like, you know, there's just a lot of different ways of doing it. But I think for certain use cases, it's essential to know who is writing it.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. I might pull us a little bit back from this conversation and touch on a high-level question around that you brought up actually backstage, Nathan, that I'm really interested in getting your opinion on. But what makes content work as a driver for growth? I think a lot of people I've been seeing the chat would be interested in this conversation. But yeah, how do you leverage content not just for engagement, but maybe how to grow the organization? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that the main thing that content does is it tells people, like at the base level, obviously it's information, right? And so like I was sort of just saying, there's like different types of information. One is like, here's a cool photo or cool product or whatever. That can work. I think the thing that most of us probably here are more interested in is like, here's an idea, here's a perspective, here's a story, here's something useful maybe in your career, how you think about how the world works. And that kind of level connection between a person is one that's based on really an immense amount of trust. You know, like if you're trusting someone to kind of download their worldviews into your head, like that's going to shape how you act in the future. I just got a message that my internet connection is unstable. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Everything good? Okay, good. Well, let me know if it messes up.
Okay. No worries. We got you.
You know, there's the affinity created by that is just huge. And I think this goes back to what we started the conversation with that Lou was talking about, is just it's so easy to underestimate the value. Because you look at, you know, a number and it's like a couple thousand or whatever, and you might think, oh, that's not very big. But you know, that's a couple thousand people that to some extent trust you. And that's huge. Like you can imagine that there's a lot that can happen with that relationship if you respect it, you know, and if you treat it well. And so I think in the short run, there's all sorts of temptations to kind of just view it as a number and a funnel and in a game, you know, of like getting people to pay for a product or whatever. And people end up doing a lot of schlocky stuff out of that. And it works in the short run. You can kind of like kill the goose that lays the golden eggs, so to speak, and like try and get them all at once. Or you can kind of nurture it over time and play the long game and think, you know, especially depending on your position, if you're like a marketer at a company and it's not really your asset that you really own, then like, yeah, maybe it makes a little more incentive to hit your short-term number. But if this is a company that you own or a personal newsletter that you're building, I mean, this is beyond one product. It's beyond one thing. The people who like on day one, when I launched Divinations, there's like 1,000 people that signed up, and that's not a huge amount of people, but it's like you're compounding something that can last your whole career. you know, especially if it's like something where your name is on it and you're developing reputation for expertise in a certain area. And so, yeah, I just think kind of treating it not too precious where you're like, you don't publish anything. Like, again, like have a schedule, hit the schedule, publish things you're uncomfortable with sometimes.
Yeah.
Like you're not sure if they're good or not. That's okay. But don't like just try and like milk it and treat the people that are on the other end of that as like a number. I think that leads to sort of a short-term gain, but long-term it completely ruins the whole thing. And I see that happen to a lot of people. Or you end up with a weird kind of audience where it's like, you know, you see the people on Twitter who have like hundreds of thousands of followers, but it's like very unspecific, kind of low quality followers. And it's like maybe they're known for like making good jokes or something, but it's like, what trust are you actually creating there? So thinking about what people are coming to you for, what people are subscribing to you for, what type of trust relationship is created. It's very easy just to try and reduce it to a number and measure one audience against another as like just bigger or smaller, and bigger might seem like it's better, but there's a lot of nuance to like how the relationships actually work, and all that grows out of what kind of content you create and what kind of attitude you approach the relationship with. Yeah,
I love the what kind of trust relationship are you building? It's a good, interesting anchor. Yeah. Any thoughts on your end, Louis?
I think Nathan covered it pretty much. I mean, the way I talk about the way I talk this is with like when they founded the BBC in the UK, which is like the public broadcasting service, basically, right? One of the people who helped set this up, Reith had what he calls his Reithian values for the BBC, which was to inform, educate, and to entertain. I think with newsletters, also have the relationship note aspect as well for maybe like 4. And what I would say is like I think it's very useful to all bear in mind what your audience is expecting from you in terms of education, being informed, being entertained. And if I were to take a look at what some of the best or the most successful newsletters tend to do out of those 3 that others don't, I'd say the entertained aspect is the one that is underutilized. I'd say if there were an opportunity on the content front to do better and to grow faster, it would be in thinking maybe a little bit less about the informing, a little bit less about the educating, and how can we just make this more fun? Basically, how can we make you like really excited to open this and enjoy it and laugh and go on from there? I think that's especially in the more B2B context is a very interesting thing to look at.
I definitely agree with that. I think especially in the B2B context, people, it's like, okay, you have like maybe a CEO who's pretty like technical or product oriented, and then they want to hire a marketer, and then so the marketer is like, what can I do that's going to please the CEO or whatever? And the CEO maybe has like the serious demeanor or whatever. And it all ends up being kind of bland usually. And even if it's really informative and good. And I think the key to humor is risk usually. And like, that's just hard in a B2B context, but if you can pull it off, and we're starting to see it more on Twitter, right? With people, social media admins, and like maybe that's gone a little bit far, but I think it's underutilized with longer form writing in the newsletter format, even if it's kind of like overdone on Twitter.
Yeah, definitely. A great example of that is actually, I think, Caitlin Burgoyne, who is, I think, speaking this week, I think, on one topic. She has her Why We Buy newsletter, which has some really good long form educational stuff as well. But one of my favorite bits of that, and I think it's an example that others should steal, is she has this this part where she does basically, I think it's called Brainy Battles, I think is the name of it, where she takes brands that have both tried a marketing tactic, and she gives a quick explanation of what each has done. And then she sort of does like a head-to-head on them and says, vote, click here to vote and see which one you think is better and which one's more effective. And I think that kind of thing it's not done so much in that format, but there's a whole, like, can be a lot more creative, I think, than most of us are at the moment. And I think if we were to look at like 5 years, 10 years in the future, I think there are going to be some really, really interesting things that people are doing there, whether it's like Morning Brew has games in the newsletter now. Caitlin's doing this sort of head thing. I think there's so much opportunity there to do some really exciting stuff that doesn't just have to be either a collection of links that we posted to the blog this week, or here is a 10-minute sort of long form piece that is just, a wall of text.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love this track we're on. Just going back to maybe a comment that you had made, Nathan, as well, the idea of having the confidence to build these long-term relationships. Oftentimes a lot of our audience is working, to your point, in a corporate environment, might be highly logical, rational thinking, culture-led organizations. What are some techniques that the audience can use to help the rest of the organization come along? And then second part of my question, I was going to say is kind of tied to that is how do you create a culture of creativity and taking risks? So maybe we'll bucket that, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can say some stuff to your first question, but to be honest, I have no idea because I have like started companies and I've worked at companies, and in my time working at companies, usually I'm like the annoying guy that has some strong belief, and I'm not very good at bringing people along in a gentle way. You know, like winning friends and influencing people, which is why I've typically washed out and started my own thing a lot of times and like worked with other people. So I don't even want to pretend to have a lot of expertise on how to do that. But I'll say, I think that just, you know, pointing to the long-term value of it is like, look, an email is something that if the person wants to keep opening it, then over the long run, we'll be able to market a lot of things too, right? And it's the opportunity of that is big. And so the opportunity cost of damaging that relationship is appropriately, it's large. I think that's very rational. I think it's very simple, and hopefully it's persuasive. But any tactics beyond just saying that thing, I don't exactly know how you could do that. I don't know. Louis maybe has ideas on that. I don't know.
Maybe
honestly, not so much.
Maybe a more specific question to that would be: are there any metrics you track internally, or are you more intuition led? You know, how do you kind of what are kind of the filters and the KPIs that you use internally to know whether you're going the right direction?
Yeah, we track a lot of metrics. The most important are at the bottom of every post that we publish. We have a little thing that says, "What did you think of this post? Amazing, good, meh, or bad?" And most people, if they actually thought a post was meh or bad, they wouldn't have made it to the bottom and clicked a link. So it's actually kind of a positive signal when someone says bad. Sometimes it's like they're angry because they disagree or whatever, but like they thought it was interesting and they wanted to let us know, you know. But we don't get, I mean, you know, you just don't get a lot of mehs or bads because the true meh is not actually even opening the email in the first place, you know, let alone making it to the bottom and bothering to click. So just looking at the number of amazings and goods and the ratio of amazing to good tells us a ton. Awesome. And we also let people leave a note, so they could just click the button, or when they land on that page, they have an opportunity to fill out some extra stuff. And, you know, we reply to like almost everyone who clicks that button. We try and say, thanks, you know, glad you liked it or whatever. We built like a quick way to do that, not automated, like, but a human can type it in on a page. And
that's great to hear. So you don't just look at mechanical metrics like open rates or click-through rates. You truly try to understand the value of the content.
Yeah, because open rate, we do look at that, but all it measures is how good was that subject line. And that's important, but it's not the whole story. Also, you know, it's a sort of like very stable measure, you know, like our open rate doesn't fluctuate that much, but piece to piece, the number of amazings and the number of goods, or the ratio between the two, that fluctuates a lot more. So it's more sensitive to actually how good that article was. So that's why we use likes basically, or the feedback more than we do open rate. But yeah, we look at open rate. We look at like link clicks and stuff like that. You know, we have an advertising business, so we for sure are looking at the link clicks on our ads and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, we have a whole dashboard of like a bunch of stuff. And we have a weekly meeting where we go over all the numbers from the previous week. But I would say the most important is just the number of likes, or the, you know, for our paid subscription business, the number of new trials that article drove, that kind of stuff. That's a stronger indicator than a like, you know, because you could really enjoy an article, but just not be the type of person that clicks feedback buttons, you know. Whereas if there's something that you see and it's behind the paywall, but you want to read it, and generally you're a fan of our stuff so far, so you become a subscriber, that's the most costly and important signal.
Awesome. Louis, any thoughts on your end? Any builds that you have there, just in terms of like the metrics and milestones you look at to kind of feel comfortable in investing in the long-term direction that you set out?
Yeah, it depends completely on the business type, right? Like how you're monetizing the newsletter, what's the newsletter there for? I think Nathan covered, you know, obviously the lifetime value of a subscriber, or the payback period that you have to pay. Obviously, then you have the whole sort of, what are you paying to get a new subscriber? What is their engagement like? You have various sort of KPIs that, depending on how you monetize the business, will be more or less important. I think two that maybe Nathan didn't mention that I look at, because it's part of when we have especially a larger media brand or an established newsletter that comes to work with us at Spark. Part of what they really want to do at the beginning is they're sort of asking us, well, you see all these other newsletters. Can you just tell us, like, how are we doing? Basically, are we doing okay? Because they don't really talk about that very much. And obviously we don't share specifics, but we can say, compared to other similar ones, you're kind of here or here. So what we tend to look at a lot is, I think, even from like day one as a newsletter, like a small newsletter operator, I would be looking at replies, like who has taken the time to actively reply to that email, either saying I don't like it, or I love it, or I disagree with this, but like who is, like, it's important enough for them to take some time out of their day to respond in some way, even if just say it's great. So that's something I'd be looking for. If you've got a newsletter with maybe 1,000 subscribers, I would be looking like I would want at least 2 or 3 replies each week. To think that I was like really knocking it out of the park, I would want 2 or 3 good replies with like, oh, this changed my life, or this, I don't agree with this, or here's how you should have thought about this, or something like that. I would aim for at least that many replies. And then the other thing that I think is really important, and obviously I'm going to say this because I run SparkLoop, is the amount that the newsletter gets shared, right? So how many other like new subscribers is your existing audience referring? And I think, especially if you want to get to a really, really large newsletter that is engaged, that is reading, that has that really good culture, you do need your existing audience to be sharing with other people and to be bringing new people into the fold. Doesn't have to be with a referral program if you don't need it. It can be just completely organic. They're sharing just because the content is so amazing. Doesn't need to be incentivized. But if people aren't sharing your newsletter with their friends at all, outside of certain specific situations like job search related newsletters where nobody wants to share that they're looking for a job and things like that, outside of those situations, I think that should be something that's really worrying for you if you're not creating content people want to share. So I would definitely look at both of those.
Yeah, awesome. And maybe last question before we transition to Q&As. Just a reminder to the audience, if you have questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A. But I love how you guys were talking about the importance of being creative, taking risks, right? Creating newsletters that don't just link to blog posts. How do you create a culture of creativity internally to kind of inspire your team members to take some risks, make some mistakes? Yeah.
I think Nathan's the one with much more experience here, so he should be.
Yeah, it's hard. I think the most important thing is for the people who are kind of setting the culture, right, who are founding the team, to really be aware of their own emotions, because the thing that kills creativity is when someone presents an idea and the person in charge is not aware of how they affect other people. So oftentimes what'll happen is someone will present something that's kind of half-baked, which is how everything starts. Yeah. And then the leader will be like, that doesn't sound good for these reasons. And they don't really realize what's happening, but what they're doing is teaching that person not to do that thing again, right? That was not a good contribution. So don't share that. Instead, if something doesn't feel right to you, and I'm not perfect at this at all, but if something doesn't feel right to you, to like be aware of that and be able to be like, okay, it'll be fine. We'll deal with that later, but draw out more from the person. Be like, oh, interesting. Like, what were you going for? Like, explain more of where you came from. Often there's something really valuable in there. It's just incomplete, right? Or it's not perfect, or there's something that's missing. And I think the sort of patience with people and really like not assuming that you understand what they're going for from the first like 2 sentences out of their mouth, but trying to be like, there, default, there's probably something to this, right? Yeah. Everyone, when they bring something up, there's something that's valid inside it. And so if you can understand what that is, oftentimes it's something that you didn't even anticipate or you didn't understand from the way that they first put it. Cause it's not like a pitch meeting where they've like done a lot of practice or whatever, this is a more of a rough thing. And I think about that a lot with like, there's like the quote from Johnny Ive, like when Steve Jobs died about how creativity is so fragile and new ideas are so fragile. I think that's exactly what he's talking about. Is it's just really easy as someone who's running a team to be afraid of making mistakes and shut down things kind of like at first sight. And then I think the other big thing is like usually different people have different problems, right? Like some people, they just don't care enough about quality, right? And so maybe for them it is better to tighten up a little bit, like care a little bit more. But I think a lot of people, they care a lot about quality, but they care so much that they don't know how to effectively translate it into actually increased quality. And so they're just very tight. And anything that kind of is outside the bounds of their preconception about what will work is just kind of like not allowed. And even if they did the thing where they took the time to understand what someone else is saying, at the end, you might still feel a little uncomfortable with it. Even you understand the good thing, you understand the missing thing. But it's much better to be like, look, let's just try it, you know? And like, I personally was a lot that way. I was very tight when we first, like my co-founder and I first started our company. And, you know, I had my newsletter and it was my perfect vision of my perfect thing. And he had his. And, you know, when we started doing more stuff that was like together, I was just very like, it all needs to be a very specific way. Over time, I learned there's a lot of stuff that works that's outside of my preconceptions of what will work. And it's really valuable to just try it because truly you never know. And so I think, just like being loose in general is the key. And it's hard to, if you're not the type of person who's loose, you're probably not going to hear me say this and magically become a loose person. So I don't know, like how to actually, you know, like meditate or something, or like, I don't know. But
I'm sure there's a plug for a meditation app here.
Right, exactly. There's an app for that.
But
something around just looseness, I think, is key to creativity and the risk and comfort with doing things that you might not predict will work, because it'll be fine. You're not walking on a tightrope. If one post doesn't go so well, it's usually completely fine. And the way that, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but one last important thing to say on this is like, no one remembers, like every single great like artist or creator of any sort or inventor has a bunch of early stuff that was horrible and no one remembers it. No one remembers your early stuff that sucks. Everyone remembers the good thing that you got to years later that you became known for. And even then you can have some stuff that sucks after that, you know, like how many things from like Paul McCartney Wings are like hits, you know, like some of them are, but like a lot, you know, it's fine. Like it's ultimately fine. And just like, I think people are way too uptight about everything that they do needing to be match some standard of perfection that's not actually real.
Yeah, no, that's great. Just wanted to say, what's it called? Awesome insights. You know, a couple for me key themes that I've taken away from this is obviously with newsletters, just get started. Beat that empty page. Make sure that you have a bit of focus, but really rely on the feedback to continue to improve the content. I think I'm going to quote you, Nathan, saying that. What's it called? It's better to get started and get that feedback than and not worry about how good or bad the content is, right? Just improve it at every rep. The other key piece that I took away from this is looking at not just the vanity metrics, but metrics that help you understand whether you're building a good long-term relationship with your audience, and then kind of tying this off as like leader within the newsletter space. Have patience, curiosity, and the confidence to let people into the creative process, right? Beat your own misconceptions. So really appreciate all the insight, Nathan and Louis. I'm gonna transition over to a couple of Q&As from our audience. So Chanel Botha asks, how do you find the balance between thought leadership / interesting content versus promoting your product in your newsletter?
NA for me, because it's just a media business.
Yeah. Louis, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think if you're approaching those two things as if they were opposite, sort of, you know, as if they're antonyms, then you have a problem. I think the way to think about this is the content I'm creating and the product that I'm pitching in effect is good. And there are going to be lots of ways to naturally build that into the content that I'm creating, because someone who wants to buy my product should also be really interested in the content I'm creating. There should be so much overlap that I think you should be able to, or what I would attempt to do in a newsletter is I would ask the question, if I weren't going to make any money from pitching this product right now, if it were just some random thing that I'm putting in there to a cool thing that someone else has made, would this still be really interesting to the reader? Would they still want to receive this? Would they want to, does it add value to the newsletter, to the content as a whole? And I would try and do it that way. So I think if you're going, well, here's a piece of interesting content, and then here's a section for me, which is just me telling you to go and buy this thing, right? I think that's guaranteed to not be particularly successful. But if you're building the product or the pitch, or even some of the advertising that you're doing, if you're building that into the content and pitching in a way that they would like, and it would be valuable even if you weren't to make any money from it, that's how I would be approaching it.
Awesome. Thanks. Two more questions here from Ramil John. Substack versus paying for a tool like ConvertKit. What's your preference?
Again, NA, I'm a Substack shareholder.
All right, Louis.
Well, we have a very close relationship with ConvertKit at SparkLoop, so I've been using them since 2015. What I'll say is, I think if you're just starting out, it doesn't really matter what tool you use. The advantage of Substack, I think, is you probably are going to start at, like, if you're really at the beginning and you've never done any newsletter stuff before, you probably are going to start faster with Substack than really anything else out there, I think. And it is incredibly easy to get started. You can always move away whenever you want to if there's something else you need. I think there are other sort of, we won't get into like the goods and bads of Substack versus other ESPs. I could talk about that for weeks on end. The one thing I will say is that you do sometimes end up in a situation, regardless of the email platform that you use, where moving away becomes, once you get a little later, it becomes a hassle. It becomes something you really don't want to do. So you end up in this position where the one little feature that your email platform doesn't have, it's never quite enough to justify spending a week and 20 hours moving to a different platform and setting everything else up from scratch. But the trouble is, there will be over a year or over a year and a half, there'll be 30 of those little things that you don't have. And each one of them will never quite be enough to make you want to move. But if all 30 of those had come up at once, you would have moved instantly. So you end up with like this like tactics of like, each little thing isn't quite enough to justify the move. Each thing would only be like a 5% difference and only a little bit helpful. But if you add them all up, you end up with a real problem. So I think bearing that in mind, and if you ever think you want to take this more seriously, then you probably want to just bite the bullet and move sooner rather than later, I think.
Nice. Awesome. What's it called? I think, Nathan, this one's teed up for you from Amanda Natividad. Sorry if I butchered that team. But when should a newsletter writer start thinking about monetization? Yeah, that's a good one for you.
Whenever you need to make money. I think so. Okay, but if you're doing a newsletter that's like, it's a personal newsletter, and you want to sort of do the Substack model or the paid solo writer model, then I actually think it helps to charge kind of early. It's hard to charge really early. Like, you probably at least want maybe like 1,000 subscribers, but I find that the rhythm of writing paid posts, if you're doing a paid subscription newsletter, is it's a good one to get used to early. And it's good to test your actual, it's important to think of it as like a whole separate newsletter with a separate value proposition from your free stuff. And so learning what kind of content to put behind the paywall and whether anyone's willing to pay for that is worth doing kind of early to sort of like de-risk it a little bit if that's like your plan. Advertising is a lot more just plug and play, right? But it's also it's a relatively tough model to do standalone and to do early. But definitely some people can do it and they do it really well. So I think it a little bit depends on, it depends on like how you can make it sustainable for you. If you're relying on wanting some money in order to be able to justify the time, like sooner than later, like sure, start sooner than later. But yeah, probably regardless of your plans, you probably need to have at least 1,000 subscribers before you start on subscriptions, and then probably more than that before you start on ads. Is like a loan, because you don't want to write for like 3 people, and I think a really good conversion rate from free to paid, if you're doing a paid subscription newsletter, is 10%. Some people get a little bit higher than that. A lot of people, once you get a bigger scaled list, tend to get lower than that, like closer to 5 is still pretty good. If you have like, hundreds of thousands of subscribers. But yeah, I don't know if that exactly answers the question, but I hope it helps.
Hey, all valuable perspective. So Awesome. Just wanted to take the last few minutes and say thank you for an awesome chat. I'd love to just wrap the session by turning the spotlight to you, Nathan and Louis, and let our audience know what you're working on and how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah, so Every, it's a writer collective focused on business. We write about business strategy and personal development kind of stuff. We have a new essay every day in your inbox, so Every.to, and I would love to hear what you think if you read it.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, I work on SparkLoop, SparkLoop.app. We build tools, growth tools to help the best newsletters and media brands out there grow their audiences faster. If that's something you'd find interesting, obviously reach out if you have a newsletter question. I'm a boring guy. I just think about newsletters all day, every day. So I would love to talk to you about it. I think that's the best place to go and find us. And I'd love to hear from people.
Awesome. So thanks again for your time, everybody. Appreciate the conversation.